Hi everyone. Today we're going to do a slightly different video format to usual. We're going to talk about the online help desk that we set up back in March, which is in the form of a dedicated email address for people to get in touch and ask questions about brewing coffee at home to ensure they're getting the very best from their beans. And what we noticed was, moving from one lockdown into another with more and more people brewing coffee at home, we began to see the same kind of questions coming back again and again, and themes start to come out and a lot of overlap in the questions being asked. So today we're going to break down 5 of the most commonly asked questions that we received to the betterbrewing@workshopcoffee.com email address, and our responses to them to give some guidance to help you overcome some of the most common problems experienced when brewing coffee at home. Okay, so the first question that seemed to come up again and again refers to brew ratios. And by that we mean how much coffee to how much water to use, specifically coming from a group of people who obviously have more than one method available. And they're asking whether they should alter the ratio for immersion methods like a French press, steep shot, clever dripper or AeroPress, compared to when they're brewing with a pour over method like a V60, Stag XF brewer or the origami dripper. The question that really stood out, which kind of surmises it, is from Sasha. And it says so. I noticed that contrary to what other people recommend for full immersion brewing methods like French press or AeroPress, a dose of 70 or even 75 grams per litre, Workshop Coffee recommends doses that are much closer to what's typically recommended for pour overs, 60 grams per litre. And he's right. We don't really recommend going with really, really heavy doses into immersion methods, which the industry has done for a little while now. I feel like some of the seed of that problem comes about when you start to plug in numbers using extraction software, using refractometers, and the idea is that these methods are somewhat inefficient because some of the brewed coffee gets held back, whereas with pour-over methods, all you're left with in the cone is spent grounds and water, rather than any actual brewed coffee itself. So it's interesting to think about how we assess the roasts when this feeds into how to brew them. We always cup our roasts for quality control with 60 grams per litre in an immersion method, and they are designed to be impactful and flavourful and nicely balanced at that ratio with an immersion method. So they are completely fine to use 60 grams per litre in an immersion method. And it also works really nicely here. They might extract slightly differently, and you can get good evenness with these methods and maybe be more efficient with these methods. But I would always start with 60 grams per litre, whatever method you're using, as a starting point. The wiggle room then comes when the actual coffee characteristics might steer you to go with a higher ratio or a lower ratio. For me, something like a really high acidity washed Kenyan coffee can taste better at around 55 grams per litre, just softening the dose that little bit to get a bit more clarity and poise in the cup. Whereas something that might be a little bit more simplistic, for example, something that's been eco-pulped and then not fermented, so the actual coffee characteristics are a little one-dimensional, you might want to go for a 70 grams per litre in any method, just to give a bit more body and a bit more intensity to the coffee. Another really common question we get asked is that people are finding their coffee taste a little bit flat at home, maybe muddy, maybe one-dimensional, not really like the coffee they get when they drink a cup in our shops. And the first thing we always ask then is whether or not they're using nice water to brew the coffee with. This question from Chris is really nice. It's saying, I'm currently attempting V60 brews, single cup, and I've had some mild success experiencing the lovely fruit tones. However, I find my brews are a little bit muddy and empty in taste. I've experimented with my technique as well as grind size, but I've had little success in bringing out the lighter floral tones. The first port of call is always to check what water people are brewing with. And if you're going straight from the tap, it's likely there are too many minerals and it's going to knock out the acidity of the cup a little bit. So always use filtered water if you can. If you're buying bottled water to brew your coffee with, that's okay, you can do that. But I would recommend trying to find something really, really soft and then cut that with filtered water to stretch it a little bit further and reduce the waste. With Chris in particular, we ended up suggesting that he take his grinder really, really coarse to try and see whether that made a dramatic difference in the cup. And it really did for him. And it might be that you think you've been experimenting with different grind sizes, but you're still working in a very small window. So try something really, really different to see if the flavors change dramatically. We did write a while ago a blog post about what you can alter with your brew specs if you're brewing with harder water. And it's a way to sort of modify the flavor balance in the cup. And we'll put a link to that in the description below this video. So the third question we're going to answer here is about when you need to scale up or scale down a recipe. So imagine you're a home brewer and you only really have one brewing device, but sometimes you want to prepare one cup, sometimes two. And the question was really about, what do I need to alter to still get really tasty results when doing a completely different recipe? So I have a question from Kevin, which was, my regular morning brew is usually 22 grams of coffee to 350 grams of water. But I'm curious, how much, if at all, would you recommend adjusting grind size as the volume changes up or down? it will sometimes brew 15 grams to 250 or 30 grams to 500. That's a really good question because you would think that V60 warrants just one grind size. But effectively, when you have a larger bed of coffee, that itself is going to create more resistance to the water flowing through. So you need to use a coarser grind when doing a bigger brew to keep the contact time similar, and a finer grind with smaller brews. With immersion methods, I also like to go with a coarser brew for bigger batches, but that's not to do with a flow rate, that's to do with thermal stability. When you've got much more hot water there, it's going to keep its temperature for longer and effectively be extracting at a higher rate for longer. So as I mentioned before, when we cup, we use 10 grams of coffee to 165 grams of water. So because it's a fairly small immersion method, we actually use a fairly fine grind to cup with. A second part to this question is about specifically the AeroPress, how you can sort of alter it to create 2 cups of coffee. And there's easily a way you can make a concentrated cup with it and then dilute it with water to create similar results to making 2 AeroPresses back to back. But sometimes people are asking if they want to add cream to the coffee or milk to the coffee. How do I keep the intensity of the coffee flavour there once I've put other ingredients in there too? And Eleanor asked a really nice question, which was saying, we've been making filter coffee at home during lockdown. I usually make a Kinto pour over, but also have a cafetiere and an AeroPress. I tend to add a bit of skim milk in an automatic frother we have. I really enjoy the sippable, smooth nature of the coffee made to your specs, but my husband wants something stronger. I'm very happy to have it stronger, but I don't know the best way forward and I don't want to ruin the lovely coffee. So that's really nice. She's been enjoying it. Wonderful. But what we actually ended up doing with Eleanor was recommending a technique that could create a more concentrated AeroPress recipe where you go inverted and you can really agitate it. And that means you don't risk under-extracting the grounds. Anytime you want to updose and create something more concentrated, you need to increase the 3 T's, which is time, temperature, and turbulence. More time in the brewer to steep it for longer, more temperature, so make sure everything's preheated and you're using boiling water, and turbulence is a way of saying agitation. Get in there with a spoon and really mix it up to make sure it's extracting fully. Another question we get asked quite a lot is about using the timer function on the grinders and whether they're consistent or not. And the simple answer is that they're not, and we don't recommend using the timer at all. You obviously can put a bag of beans in here, hit go, and it will grind for a certain amount of time, but your dose is likely going to be a bit inconsistent, and that's definitely a problem that's been occurring for people. So what we've recommended that they do instead is keep the beans away in a cupboard in the bag, sealed up, and just weigh out before you brew the dose you need then and there. You can minimize retention by tapping the lid, flapping the knocker on the fellow ode, but you don't want to really have your beans sitting in here for any long period of time anyway, and the timers are inconsistent. On our bars we use espresso grinders with timers, but we always check the dose afterwards. But at home you're not really going to be making coffee so frequently that you need to fill this up. So Matilda asked us, I'm struggling to get consistent results using the timer on my grinder. Sometimes it gives me a lot of coffee, whereas at other times it seems to grind only a few beans at a time. I'm worried the grinder is faulty. Have you experienced this as well? And it's not faulty. It's definitely not going to give you as consistent results. It might seem easier, but ultimately you won't get consistent results using a timer function on your grinder. So the last question we want to address here today is about issues that come around at the end of a brew, which is sometimes called choking or clogging, but ultimately when the final portion of your brew is going through the bed of coffee very slowly. So here's a question from Tom. My brews are choking towards the end, which makes me think that I'm mostly suffering from too many of the fines migrating to the bottom of the brewer, clogging the filter paper. The water goes from a slow trickle to a drip, drip, drip at the end, often lasting for another minute, which takes the overall brew time to over 5 minutes. My drawdowns can take up to 2 minutes. So drawdowns and fines migration, these are terms that suggest Tom really knows what he's doing with brewing filter coffee, and after exchanging some pictures, his technique was really great. Some of the problems that might cause your brews to choke can be if your grinder burrs are a little bit dull and giving you more sort of dusty fine particulates rather than nice pieces that are all even in size. But also it can be if you're agitating the brew too much, and that sort of causes those to, as he says, clog the filter paper. Some filter papers are very, very thick, like the Chemex, and they can sort of hold on to these little fine pores of coffee, fine pieces of coffee that clog the pores and slow the drawdown. So there are ways to mitigate slow drawdown or choking brews. Don't brew onto a mug like this where you're going to have issues with air not being able to escape from the vessel when the coffee's draining into it, so maybe something with a lip is better. Not stirring too much, just enough to get everything wet and pouring nice and evenly and gently through the bed rather than anything with too much churning. But also with the clever dripper in particular, you can watch our video brew guide on that. And if you're adding your water first and then your coffee, it really helps with the drawdown because you don't have the bed settling in a way that tends to choke the clever dripper. Thank you once again if you've already emailed our online help desk. We get a lot of satisfaction from helping customers get better results in their cup at home. And grappling with high quality whole bean coffee, that whole process of preparing a cup can be really enjoyable in itself. So we're very grateful to those who've reached out already. We will likely do another video like this in time as more and more questions accrue. And if you have any questions to ask us in the meantime, it's betterbrewing@workshopcoffee.com. And that's all from us for today. So take care and we'll see you soon.